This is the Washington Times front page for Monday, June 5th, 2023. Thanks for starting your week with us. I'm George Gerbo. The FBI, National Security Agency, and State Department are preparing a new cyber strategy to specifically counter what officials describe as a sophisticated North Korean spear phishing threat. In interviews with more than a dozen current and former national security officials, Ryan Lovelace and Guy Taylor learned that a core aspect of the threat involves hackers tied to North Korean intelligence using bogus email accounts to impersonate U.S. officials. While the fake accounts are initially used to spur conversations with high-level policy experts, sources told Ryan and Guy that the hackers are likely engaged in a more sinister campaign to burrow deep inside the computer networks of companies and institutions engaged in national security. The administration remains tight-lipped about the effort, although sources familiar with it say the strategy will be made public in the coming days. Deputy Political Editor Dave Boyer breaks down the recently passed bipartisan deal to raise the debt ceiling. Republicans and Democrats agreed before beginning their negotiations to not touch so-called mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those programs account for nearly two-thirds of annual federal spending. Interest payments on the national debt are another built-in cost, totaling $663 billion in the current fiscal year. That's roughly 10% of the federal budget. The Congressional Budget Office said the new law will cut deficits by $1.53 trillion over the next decade, almost all of it due to caps on discretionary spending. But there's a lot of wiggle room in the deal to allow for higher spending in the years ahead. Opponents of the deal say the agreement essentially has enshrined pandemic-era emergency spending levels as the new normal. President Biden's fall at the Air Force Academy graduation in Colorado is heightening Democrats' concerns about their mindset for the 2024 presidential campaign and giving would-be rivals more reason to prepare for an entry into the race. Seth MacLachlan reports Democratic power brokers rallied behind the 80-year-old president in a show of force, dismissing concerns about his age. Behind the scenes, however, party insiders say activists are fretting about Biden's age and say other Democrats are waiting in the wings and going over their options, albeit under the radar. An Air Force officer and members of his Secret Service detail rushed to help pull the president back to his feet before he returned to his seat for the remainder of the event. A Chinese destroyer twice crossed the bow of a U.S. Navy destroyer at high speed in the Taiwan Strait in an apparent intimidation tactic. Andrew Salmon reports footage from a Canadian ship nearby shows the speeding Chinese destroyer overtaking the USS Chung Hoon and crossing its bow at about 150 yards, forcing the American ship to reduce its speed to avoid a collision. The Chinese destroyer then repeated the maneuver. U.S. Indo-Pacific Command called the Chinese actions unsafe and stressed that in the strait, high seas freedoms of navigation and overflight apply. And finally, in a follow-up to a story from Friday, Pentagon correspondent Ben Wolfgang recaps the redesignation ceremony of Fort Bragg to Fort Liberty. Few bases carry the historic weight of the Army installation in Fayetteville, North Carolina, home to the iconic 18th Airborne Corps and its most famous division, the 82nd Airborne. By population, it's the largest military installation in the country, with over 53,000 active duty troops stationed there and another 14,000 civilians working on site. Find all today's front page stories at WashingtonTimes.com/front page or on the Washington Times app, and find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Washington Times in your favorite podcast app. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Wash Times for breaking news, sports, commentary, and more. For the Washington Times, I'm George Gerbo.